before I do start, I just want to acknowledge the land yoga, any kind of general exercise that we're doing. Owners. So the origins of TRE were from trauma release exercises, where the guy who started it was working in the third world with huge populations and trying to find ways that we could help people unwind, you know, trauma, like life and death situations, trauma. So he did that for a long time, but then when he came back to the West, he found that a lot of people were using it and starting to notice that, oh, my back pain's gone away, my neck's getting better. And of course, the way our bodies respond to stress or to life and death trauma are very, very similar. So it soon became known as tension release exercises. I sometimes call it core release exercises because that's a lot sexier and people get interested, and people get worried about the idea of trauma. But what I'm also going to show you is when we think about trauma physiologically, the state of our body, it will start to make a lot more sense about how it all fits in. So, what causes shaking during Pilates, yoga and other forms of exercise? Has anyone ever been doing exercise and noticed their body start to shake or tremor? Yep. So what are some of what would you think the causes were that? If you're like me, and what I got taught at university, is we would have said, okay, well, we're tremoring because we've just got to our maximum load and the muscle can't hold it anymore. So if you're, you know, pressing 20 kilos, you're like, come on, push out one more rep, and it's like, and then you get to your collapse point and then you stop. And generally in most exercise forms, you would say, okay, well, that's the end of the repetition because you can't do any more weight. Some people do pyramid training where they'll go, okay, well, now drop your 20 Ks, pick up 10, you know, do 5, get to that shake and then put it down. But eventually we get to the point where we go, okay, I'm shaking, that's enough, we're finished. Okay? Now those sort of tremors known as postural fatigue or muscle tremors, they need a loading on the muscle. So the need to like have a load as if I'm picking something up, so the muscle's going, I can't keep working with this. And it tends to be involving our peripheral nervous system or just the local muscle group. So it's like if I'm getting a shake and I'm doing 20 kilos here and this is shaking, if I put that down, it doesn't mean anywhere else in my body is going to shake. If I go and pick up another 20 kilos here, I'm going to have to do another 20 reps to get till that one starts to fatigue, okay? But these tremors are actually a doorway to a much deeper form of tremor known as a neurogenic or a nervous system or a release tremor. And neurogenic just basically says that they're originating out of the nervous system. So rather than when we get to that point where we start to shake and then we go, the muscles are tired and we're fatigued, what we're going to go through today is we're going to reduce the load on the muscle but maintain the tremor. And then what that starts to do is invoke this deeper release, or this deeper tremor, which is basically coming out of the central nervous system. So it's more of a nervous system release rather than just the straight muscle fatigue. It can occur anywhere in the body. So for example, we'll be lying down and we'll be tremoring in the legs. We'll start by fatiguing the adductors after we've done some other work. But you could be lying there and then someone's hand will start to tremor. Okay, possibly. And it doesn't require any effort necessarily or any loading of the muscle. So has anyone ever been in a stressful situation when you're public speaking or something like that and your body starts to shake? So there's no loading, it's not a fatigue tremor, or if you've had a car accident or something like that. So it's really a continuum, and it's not like, oh, this postural tremor and this one's a nervous system tremor. It's not as separate as that, but it helps to think of what's the difference between this one that needs a lot of loading versus this tremor that's happening on its own. So most people, I'll show you some videos, if you're doing Pilates and your body starts to tremor, you'll be going, oh my God, I'm out of control. So I've got to stop, I've got to get that back into control. But what we're missing there is that tremor and that release coming out of the nervous system, that is the way that the body releases unconscious tension. Okay? So today when we do the exercises, we're going to do very, very simple basic exercises because these ones are designed that anyone in the world can kind of do them. Now it could be Pilates you're doing, you could be doing yoga. We're going to do these simple fatiguing exercises. And as the muscles that are holding tension start to get tired, they'll start to tremor, and then we'll just maintain the exercise, reduce the load, and then we'll be starting to invoke this deeper tremor. I'll show you some videos and that sort of thing. So in terms of the bit of background to the story, the guy who developed TRE, Dr. David Berceli, he was a social worker, massage therapist. He spent his whole life in third world zones, in war zones and natural disasters and working with trauma. And he had his own experience with PTSD, but one time after he recovered from that, he found himself in Africa in a small village, and this village was experiencing an air raid. So people were flying over and dropping bombs. And what they would do is each of the adults would grab 2 of the kids, go and sit down in the bomb shelter and sit them on their knees. Now, he'd lived in lots of war zones, but he said this was absolutely terrifying, and as the bombs were coming closer, the ground was shaking, the noise was insane. He noticed that both of the kids on his knees were shaking crazily, And then he looked around the room and he noticed that all the children in the room were tremoring, but not one adult. He also noticed that the younger the child, the more they were shaking, and as they got older they were shaking less. Now, with his own background in some of this work, he noticed that his own arm was tremoring and it felt kind of relaxing. Most people are freaking out in this situation. He's like, oh, this is an interesting little experiment. So afterwards he asked the people there, he said, do any of you adults ever shake when the bombs are coming? And they all said, no, we don't want the children to know we're scared. And I was, there is something happening here that we are suppressing. And all of us, if you get up to do your first presentation in grade 2 and your paper's shaking, what are you going to do? You start to lock it in. So in our culture we completely lock these tremors down from a very young age. The tremor that we're talking about here, again, if you're up public speaking, there's no muscle fatigue, so it's not tiredness. This is the nervous system. There's too much charge. In this case it's anxiety or fear. But it could also be excitement. If you've ever seen someone win Tats Lotto or The Voice and they're like shaking. It's like you think about a car battery, which is, I don't know my physics very well, it's like 24 volts. It's like if you've got 40 volts going through, it's going to explode. And that's like our nervous system has a capacity to carry charge. So if I'm terrified and there's more charge, my body actually has to shake to release that tension. Okay? If I'm so excited that I've won Tats Lotto that I've got 40 volts of excitement, my body will shake the same way to calm my nervous system back down. But we have tended to only ever associate these tremors as a sign of anxiety or stress because they often occur at those times. But they're not actually a symptom of fear or anxiety, they're actually a sign that the body is recovering from it. So the tremors we're talking about here, they're an innate tension release reflex. They're coming out of the nervous system. As I say, they're not dependent on the muscles so much. I mean, they are vibrating the muscles, but it's not because of fatigue. It's a genetic process within every single human being, and part of the joy of my job is I'm not here teaching you a new therapy or a new process or I'm giving you a new set of exercises, but basically what we're doing is reawakening a release reflex which is already inside every single one of you, but we just haven't known to use it, and we've spent our whole life locking it down and controlling it. Part of what this tremor mechanism does is it discharges and completes the fight, flight or the freeze process, and I'll cover that in a little bit more detail. And any of you are aware of this, extinction of a sensory motor experience. So has anyone heard of fight and flight? Yeah, we've all heard of that. You heard of rest and digest? So that's about all that we used to get taught, and when I was at uni that was you got fight and flight, rest and digest. Has anyone heard of the freeze response? So this is really the critical thing, because if fight and flight, my body mobilises energy. If it doesn't overcome the threat, then my body will go into a collapse or a freeze response, where I'm basically like playing possum or playing dead, in order to try and save my life and overcome or survive the threat. And that's really where we all know when we're in fight or flight, but often we don't know when we're starting to get shut down and compliant in our bodies. Now, as I say, lots of people experience these tremors, and if you go into your psychologist and you tell him that you're having tremors and you've been a soldier and you've just come back from Afghanistan, they will use these tremors as a way of diagnosing, okay, well, you've got panic attacks. If you're getting tremors and shaking when you're in social situations, you've got this, blah, 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 post-traumatic stress. So even though these tremors are well recognised, no one's actually really looked at and thought, why are we all tremoring? What is it about? They've just said, this is a symptom, because psychology traditionally hasn't looked at the body at all. It's always seen as mental health or psychological stress. So it's a bad. So people will go, oh, I'm tremoring, this is bad, I've got to control it. And because traditionally everything is being dealt with psychologically and the body's been excluded, so no one's going, well, why are they tremoring? You know, I often ask vets, I say, have you ever seen a dog shake in a thunderstorm? They go, yeah, all the time. I say, why? Like, because they're scared. I say, yeah, I know they're scared, but why are they tremoring? Why aren't they wetting their pants? Or, you know, why aren't they yelping? Why are they tremoring? What is it actually doing? And we look at the body, then we start to recognise, okay, this is actually discharging our fight and flight tension. Part of the difficulty, so when I speak to the Australian Psychological Society, they say this has got nothing to do with psychology because it's using the body. Of course, when I speak to the Australian Physiotherapy Association, they say this has got nothing to do with physiotherapy because this is about stress and trauma and emotions, and we're not qualified to do any of that. So there's this huge gap where this whole process has just fallen through the cracks. So when we come to think about how does stress and trauma, what's that got to do with Pilates? None of us, or very few of us, are coming going, I've just had a really traumatic experience, I need to do Pilates. We don't tend to think of it, or I need to do exercise. So there's a guy called Dr. Robert Scaia who was a orthopaedic rehabilitation specialist in the US. and he was also a psychologist background. And where his journey started was he was referred a woman one day for piriformis syndrome, so very common, we all see people coming with this. And when he took a full psychological history, what he discovered was that this woman had been sexually abused. And it set off some sort of little link, and he started thinking. The next 30 people that he got referred for piriformis syndrome, he took a full psychological history, and he found that 30 out of 30 had all been sexually abused when they were younger. I think it was like 27 men and 27 women and 3 men. So it started him thinking, what is going on? Because in a way it's like, when I went to uni, if you said, oh, I've got this tight muscle, they'd say, well, there's some mechanical cause. It's because of your position of your hip, or the posture, you know, or how you're using it, or the way it's too short or it's too tight. Whereas I'm going, well, why is it too tight? Why is my posture like that? And so he then he spent his whole life looking at the role of unresolved trauma into whiplash. And one of the key things about here, is there anyone here who is deliberately now hunching their shoulders up and, you know, tightening up their back to give themselves a sore neck and a sore back? No, none of us. The tension that we have in our body is all unconscious, correct? It's instinctual. Otherwise, if it wasn't, you'd all come to see me and I'd say, just lie down, take a few breaths and relax. There we go, $65, thank you. But we can't, because the tension patterns in our body are all being activated unconsciously, okay? And when the body goes into any kind of stress response, it tends to move towards this fetal position, not with the head down, with the eyes up so we can still see, and the jaw clenched, okay? And this whole process, there's these deep muscles that are all linked in from the adductors through the psoas all the way up to the masseter in the side of the jaw. So all these muscles are involved in this contraction. Okay, so a lot of people who end up with TMJ problems and jaw problems, you'll find that the origins of it will be coming from around this defensive contraction that we start to get into around our pelvis. Now, again, at uni, if I would have been taught, oh, you know, yes, as your head goes forwards, this is a head forwards posture. What's the problem? It's because of the way the person's sitting. These muscles are tight, these muscles are long, weak, whatever. And so, yeah, but why are they like that? Well, it's because they've been on the computer for 10 hours. Okay? Yeah, but my 7-year-old can sit on a table with one leg up, watching, you know, on the phone, doing computer with her head like that for 6 hours. She's not going to get a sore neck. So it can't just be that. And if you start to recognise these postures as part of our stress or defence response and that contraction, it starts to make sense of going, wow, there's these patterns in our body that are all related to unresolved stress patterns. Now, most of you will have heard of the psoas and work with that. When we do the tremors, we're going to start by fatiguing. We're going to do all your leg muscles, fight and flight muscles, work into the adductors, and kind of theoretically, if you're mechanically based, okay, this is not the full reality, but if you're biomechanically based, think about that we're going to try and release the psoas, because this is like where our centre of gravity is, and this is the point at which our bodies start to protect. Okay, so if you're biomechanical, you use that model. It's not necessarily the full picture. Now, on some level, whenever we get a sore back, again, at uni, I'd say, okay, someone's got a sore back. You've got to work out whether it's a disc bulge or whether it's a facet joint problem. If it's you go, okay. But when you recognise that at any point we get stressed, on some level the psoas muscle starts to contract, to pull us down towards this contraction. Now, we can't live like that. So what then tends to happen is, you know, QL and a range of other things are going to start to pull me back up to straight. So what happens is you've got psoas pulling down at the front, QL at the back, and you get a compression of the spine. So yes, it could be a disc bulge, could be a facet joint problem. Why is the spine compressed? Why isn't there flexibility and integrity and tensegrity between there? And invariably, it's because these unconscious contractions that are compressing the spine. Is that making sense? So it's like really going, why are these muscles tight? What's making these muscles tight and why are they tight? When we start to think about stress and trauma, again, in a psychological model, we're going, oh, trauma is life and death. It's a car accident. It's a bushfire. It's someone who's just died. But if we start to think about what's the difference between stress and trauma physiologically in the body, it's actually not such a huge big deal. Stress is when our body mobilises our energy to try and overcome or avoid a threat. So it's our fight or flight response. If a guy comes through that door, we're all going to get tight and ready. We're going to peripheralise our energy. We're going to send blood and energy to our muscles, because we're going to ready ourselves to either run for our life, jump out the window, or go and fight and take that guy down. okay? So that's stress. And at this point, the body's saying, if I just mobilise a bit more charge and get a bit bigger and a bit stronger and get a bit more muscly, I'm going to be able to overcome this, okay? So that's like stress response. It's like the orange light. Big danger, but we're not thinking we're totally overwhelmed yet. In terms of tense readiness, you think about someone who's, you know, on the starting blocks for a race and they're like set and then they're up and they're ready to go and everything's tight, or a cat about to pounce, okay? Now in our culture, most of us live our entire lives in this state where we've all got this tension. What's that about? That's fight or flight. That is tension getting ready to move. All these things, this tension that we tend to think of biomechanically, is partly coming because we've got these unresolved and incomplete responses. Now, when we look at trauma, and not thinking about it psychologically but physiologically, trauma is any time that the body immobilises our energy, so we go into this locking down to try and survive a threat. Now, at the most extreme form, we've got, you know, playing possum or playing dead, or giving up and surrendering. So you imagine the guy comes through, I try and run, I can't, I try and fight him, 3 other guys come in, there's no way I can get away, right? So I've mobilised as much as I can. My last option to survive is to go, if I give up and surrender and be helpless and hopeless, hopefully I will survive, okay? A lot of people who go through sexual abuse will have the experience of giving up and surrendering and then beat themselves up because they didn't fight back enough and that. But it is a healthy and normal survival mechanism to go into this freeze response or a fold response. Now, when we again take this away from thinking psychologically, we're going to bring it back to the body and movement. Fight and flight is designed to create movement, either away from the threat or towards the threat, okay? So if that guy comes in and I'm terrified and my body's charged up and then I have to surrender, it's not like all of a sudden I become calm and relaxed. That fear and all that charge is movement. It's got to go somewhere. And effectively what happens is unconsciously again, our neuromuscular system comes in and holds those movements in, because internally I'm still terrified, whether I'm feeling it or not. So the body's charged to just explode. Now you may have just think about how much effort this takes to contain this. As you imagine the guy's fighting me and I'm fighting for my life, and I just say, oh, okay, can you just come over and hold my body so it doesn't move at all and it looks calm and relaxed? So that when we're in this state, even though we look calm and relaxed, the body's actually more charged up and the nervous system is working even harder to contain the movement. This is the key thing about the movement, okay? So the body is locking in movement. The way to think about this is it is similar to if you need to go to the toilet. So if I'm here, I'm presenting and I'm like, oh, I need to go to the toilet. I don't have to consciously go right now, find my bladder sphincter, that's it, contract it, hold that, good, hold that, perfect. Unconsciously the body creates tension, muscular contraction, and it holds. The same thing happens whenever we're in a stress or a trauma response where we have to suppress our reaction, okay? The muscular system is holding, same way as that bladder, is holding in the movement that is wanting to come out. Is that making sense to you all? Now again, think about it physiologically. This isn't about life and death. Just say I'm at school and I'm in grade 3 and there's someone who's bullying me and they've been bullying me in the playground, and we come down and they're sitting next to me. Everything in my body is saying, I want to get out of here. I want to run away. Can I run away? No. It's like saying, I need to go to the toilet. Can I just go here? No. So if I can't run away, my neuromuscular system has to contain the urge to run away. And it does it unconsciously by creating low-level, unconscious tension to hold in the movements. When we look at psychological suppression, or that idea of, oh, the people, they're bottling it in, when you start to look at the body, you're going, that is a physical reality. But it's not conscious. As I say, no one's sitting here going, I want to have that tension spot in here and in here and in here, are we? It's an unconscious process. What it means is that our nervous system basically has 3 primary states. And I'm not going to go into too much detail with this today, but just to cover, when we're calm and relaxed, we're engaged and will have naturally be more communicative and engaging with people. If the guy comes through the door, my first response is actually to try and engage more. Excuse me, mate, what are you doing? Try and make him a friend and all that sort of thing, or use my voice. But if that doesn't work, we go into fight or flight. Those of you who've got this background, so sympathetic nervous system, it's like all the brakes are off. I'm going to pump up and get bigger and stronger. Now, when I'm putting all my blood flow, just think about blood for a minute, into my muscles, it goes away from my digestive organs, because I don't care about digesting yesterday's pizza while I'm fighting for my life. So we end up with a huge array of digestive problems, Crohn's disease and all the other irritable bowel and all that, partly involving the stress response that's been chronically activated. Same thing, the blood flow will go away from my bone marrow. I don't want to be growing new bone while I'm fighting for my life. I want it in my muscles. So osteoporosis, partly there's a huge impact of chronic stress where the body is sending out, it's like if I'm in fight or flight, it's sending the blood out to my muscles and away from my bone. Now, if that doesn't deal with the threat, and unfortunately as humans, most of the threats we experience in our culture are psychological or anticipatory. It could be, you know, oh, is my partner going to run away from me? Am I going to run out of money? Am I going to lose my job? Now, the body doesn't care, the muscles don't really care what the threat is. They can only do one or two things, kind of contract or relax. So if I've got a stressor like, oh, how am I going to, you know, get enough money to pay my tax and da-da-da, I can't physically fight that. So there's nowhere for that urge to go. Then we move into this immobility response, and the critical thing here is the sympathetic nervous system is effectively still running like crazy. It's like the engine of the car is flat out. But then the parasympathetic nervous system, or like the braking system, I always think of para for parachutes if you're not used to it, that comes on at the same time to stop those movements coming out. So when you're in grade 3 and you've got the bully and you want to run away but you can't, what you have is your sympathetic nervous system doing everything in its power to get you away from this stressful situation, and in order to stay, your parasympathetic nervous system has got to hold the brake on. It's like driving through life with the accelerator and the handbrake on at the same time. Most of us do that. And when we come in to see Pilates or physio and we go, oh, I've got this tight here and this tight here and I can't move and I can't run, we think that's normal ageing. That's not normal ageing. It's very common, but it's actually showing that we've got all these unresolved patterns that are still locked and held in our body. Again, the key thing to remember is that when we're in a stress or trauma response, it's about trying to create movement. We tend to think it's about emotion, but the emotions are there to increase our movement. So if I'm scared, I'm running from the guy, the more scared is going to make me run faster. The more angry and rageful, I'm going to fight harder. Emotions aren't there just because we're humans and we have to somehow suffer with these emotions. So when we realise that it comes back to movement, then it starts to link, well, how does this work into Pilates and exercise and all sorts of body work? Is because where is this tension coming from? It's unresolved experiences that we've had that we've never actually let go of and can come completely back to baseline. So again, coming back to the brain's response, how does our brain respond to stress and trauma? And just to keep it very simple, and it's not the entire process, it's very complicated, but this is easy enough for us. We can divide the brain into 3 main areas. And if we start down at the oldest part of the brain in the brainstem, known as the reptilian or the body brain, and this part of our brain is what deals with everything that is unconscious. My respiration, my heart rate, my breathing. Whether you're sitting there now or whether you're in the middle of a Pilates class, you're not consciously trying to increase your heart rate. You're not necessarily consciously directing your breathing. Most importantly, this part of the brain, this unconscious part, creates muscle tone. So if you're like this and your shoulders are up, that is unconscious. It's being generated out of this part of the brainstem, okay? In this model, again, it's not always as simple as it, but in this model, if you think about that the brainstem's role is about muscle tone, this is where primarily we're going to immobilise the body or reduce movement, okay? And you reduce movement if you're stressed by locking it in. If I've got the urge to punch and run, somehow that's got to be stopped. I can't just let it go, otherwise I'm calm. My body's going to create tension to hold it. Also importantly for us, the tremors that you're going to experience today are evoked here in the brainstem, in the same part of the brain that generates the tension in the first place, okay? So that's the beauty, is because we can't consciously go, I mean, you could consciously pretend to tremor. You could be lying there today and go, oh, I'm going to tremor and shake like that, but that's completely different to when your body starts to shake and move on its own. In the same way that you could control your heart rate or your breathing, that's very different than if your breathing starts to relax naturally on its own. In the middle part of the brain, we've got the limbic system, and known as the mammalian or the emotional brain, and it's primarily, again, these two really work very much together, but in this model, primarily this is about our emotions, okay? So our fight and flight emotions, all our basic emotions. And this really is about creating more movement. Now, if a car backfires or a gun goes off, we're all going to do that before we've consciously thought about it. If you're walking along and you see a stick or something, or maybe a snake on the first thing that's going to happen is you'll jump back before you've consciously worked out what it is. Because when the body senses a threat, it takes longer for the messages to come all the way up here for me to think about it. Could be like 0.2 of a second. And so what happens is whenever we're in an automatic stress or trauma or tension sort of response, the messages just come up in here. It's all dealt with unconsciously, okay? So the brainstem will activate and the emotions will activate. And what's also important is generally, not always, but generally what happens is the body responds first and the emotions come on second, okay? Because this gets the message first. We tend to think that emotions are what causes our stress. Now I can get to sit here and all think about your most stressful thing, keep thinking about it, try and make yourself scared, and your body will follow. But more often than not, 90% of the time, it's actually happening in the other direction. Which is why I can't just say if you're really stressed about something, hey, just think about something nice, forget about it, and your tension just all disappears. Because this is all running on its own. Does that make sense? And when you recognise that as soon as that guy comes through the thing, my body responds first, then the emotions come, then we get less focused of going stress and trauma is about emotions. We go, hey, it's about movement. Or if it's unresolved, it's about a lack of movement that we're containing in our body. Is that making sense to you? The last part of our brain up here, the top, the cortex, this is the human part of our brain that allows us to have our thoughts, imagination, time, all that sort of thing. When everything is calm and relaxed, this part of the brain is naturally operating. It means you can learn new things, engage. You ever meet someone, hi, yeah, my name's Richmond, hi Brian, and then you're thinking, what was that guy's name? Straight away. Or have you ever had an argument with your spouse, or you've had an important conversation with your boss, and then you walk out afterwards going, why didn't I say that? Why did I forget? Or you've studied all night, you've got all the information, then you get into the exam and guess what, your hand's a bit shaky. Have you ever noticed that? And all of a sudden you can't remember? It's because when we're in a traumatic state, our brains are designed not to think because it takes longer. So the minute we are stressed, this part of the brain basically starts to shut down. So we start to react unconsciously and instinctually. Have you ever gone home and said, right, tonight I'm not going to yell at the kids? You know when they do that thing with my partner, I'm not going to do it, and then you walk through, they're like, oh, what are you doing? It's like, what's happening there? It's because when we're in a stress response, our bodies are designed to react instinctually, okay? And part of that instinctual response is to either make us move like hell or to not move at all. Okay, and primarily when it's unresolved, it's because we haven't moved or haven't discharged it. So what maintains our muscle tension? And just think about this for a moment. We've all got this tension that we're all working with, and Pilates and yoga, we're all trying to... If we give you a general anaesthetic, it's all gone. What's going on there? Not entirely, because you've got fascial and you can have things that have been basically linked down, but primarily, you go on a general anaesthetic and the tension is gone. You become floppy. So doesn't that tell you that there's something other than the biomechanics that's generating the tension to do with our nervous system? So again, Robert Scaer talks about this. Trauma is caused by, and think about it physiologically. So when I read the word trauma, don't think, oh, the life and death experience. Think, when was a time when my body wanted to move or wanted to do something that I couldn't do it, like about 1 million times at school? Probably some of you sitting here now are going, I want to go to the toilet, and you're not, Trauma is caused by the absence or suppression of a body-based discharge after recovery from the state of freeze immobility. If the discharge did not occur, all of the body-based experiences of the threat will be stored in procedural memory, don't worry about that, as if the traumatic event was still present and not a past memory or experience. And Robert Scaer spent the next, 30 years of his life working with about 10,000 whiplash people. Now, whiplash is something that, certainly in physiotherapy, is treated very, very poorly because it doesn't fit with the idea that it's inflammation or there's tension. Whereas when you start to look at going, whenever you have an experience, and people estimate different things, but they suggest that you're taking in about 40,000 pieces of information unconsciously every second. So if I'm a little child and I get bitten by a black dog, part of what happens is that unconsciously, everything that looks like a black dog starts to become scary and my body's going to react to it. Not only that, but if there's roses blooming on the tree over here next to the black, when I got bitten by the black dog, then all of a sudden down the track I've got allergies to roses, and every time I'm near roses for some reason, and I don't like the woman next door who's got roses for some reason, because our body is still responding to these old events. So that when I'm 20 and a little cute black poodle comes up with a big, you know, smile and wag, I'm still on alert here, because my body is still reacting to something that's happened a long time ago. Now that's a normal, healthy thing, because we've gone, well, that was a process that was a bit scary. But what it means is that every time you get back in the car, or you hear the sound of the engine or the brakes or the red car goes past, on some level your body starts to go back towards that position and you get all the contraction and all the pain. But we tend to look at only biomechanically. Why is it all tightening up? Because there's this whole process. Now, Robert Skayer had a fascinating thing. He said in about 10,000 clients that he saw, he never had one client with whiplash who was a smash-em-up, dodgy, dodgem car driver. Now, isn't that fascinating? And he said he also saw no one in his 20-year career who was drunk at the time of the accident, who had whiplash. Now, isn't that interesting? So it's showing you here there's more going on than just there's a biomechanical, this is a piece of meat and it's a muscle, it's too tight and we need to make it longer. There's a whole nervous system response going on here. So, let me just show you a couple of quick, well, not too quick, I'm going to show you a couple of videos, because once you're aware of this information, you'll start to see that we have this tremoring happen all the time. Okay, so here's a guy who's gone up the Great Wall of China. All right, so he's effectively maxed out his muscles.
This is Darren's leg. He can't control after the Great Wall.
So if you were teaching Pilates, or you're in Pilates and your legs started to do that, you'd be going, oh my God, what's happening? I'm out of control. My body's out of control. Whereas when our heart rate goes up and starts pumping because we'll come up the stairs, we're going to go, oh my God, my heart's out of control. But we've got this ability to consciously control our muscles, so when it starts to move on its own, we tend to get freaked out. Has anyone ever seen this sort of thing happening? Teenage boys, and what do we do at school? Stop moving! So basically their body's charged, especially teenage boys, they're full of, testosterone, they've got all this charge, and they just want to sit here all day like this and do this, and we're like, stop moving. So what happens? That charge has to be suppressed. How does that movement get stopped? It gets stopped because your muscles and your nervous system have to come on and go, okay, we're going to lock that down. And then in our culture, we have, white man's hips, where we can't walk and we get to 40 and, can't play footy, and we go, oh, it's just because my piriformis is tight. Yeah, but why is it tight? Why is it all locked down? So you'll see this stuff everywhere, people tapping their fingers. Now this next video, just so you're aware, has got a picture of a deer that's been shot in it at the end of the video. So if that's going to be offensive for you, then don't watch. But this is a young girl who's gone on her first deer hunt.
Why are you shaking?
So this is not necessarily traumatic. She's so excited, they call it buck fever, that her nervous system's got more charge in it and it's actually shaking to calm her nervous system back down.
Tell me what happened.
Does that make sense? So if you're a woman and you've given birth and you start to shake, what will traditionally happen is they will go, you must be cold, we're going to cover you up with blankets and calm you down and get you to stop that tremoring. I know women who've been medicated, tied down and held down because their bodies were shaking. Yet in traditional African cultures, they deliberately use these tremors, keeping the woman standing after birth until her body has completed tremoring, because they know that if they don't tremor, there's going to be unresolved stuff still happening in their body. All right, so that's...
It's just twitching, honey. You're okay.
So that's that one.
I'm scared it would have been getting up then.
So when I started teaching TRE, and when it was first taught to me, what I used to think was, I'd go, okay, and this is what I got taught. It was like, we're going to invoke the tremors. We're going to turn the tremors on. We're going to do these exercises that's like a switch that will turn them on. Whereas what I recognise now is, if you think about our bodies, every tension point that we have is like our body is wound up, ready to explode. Okay? So we're not really doing exercises to turn them on. What we're going to do is all the muscles that are holding tension in for these patterns, we're going to fatigue them so they can't keep holding it in. And effectively the body's sitting there just going, I can't wait until this person lets go, because as soon as I'm going to start to move, which is why when you go to bed and you're just in that half awake thing, your leg starts to, you're like, oh, hang on, what's going on? Or in dreams you will move. Or anyone have restless leg syndrome? Restless leg syndrome, if you go to the doctor, they will medicate you to stop restless legs. What do you think restless legs is? It is the nervous system in the body going, I've got too much charge, I've got to try and get rid of it. And most people will find if they've got restless legs, if they do tremoring a couple of times, it will start to decrease almost straight away. Now that you've learnt this, the next time you see someone shaking, you'll be going, okay, he's really stressed, he's shaking, that's actually helping calm his nervous system. That means that his brain's going to work better. The more he shakes, the more his brain works, the better presentation. But because we don't understand that, we'd go, oh my God, that guy looks terrified and scared. It's like, yes, it's a natural reflex that we let go of. It's helping us let go of the movements. It can be that you've actually just trained yourself to hold it in and look like you're not scared for your whole life. I mean, that's what we generally all tend to do. And one of the key things as part of our trauma response is it's designed that we're not aware of it. When our body goes into immobilisation, then I'm not going to feel it. So you think, you know, evolutionary-wise, if I'm on the plains of the savannah and the saber-toothed tiger has got me and it's about to rip me apart, I don't really want to feel it. And if I'm fighting for my life and the guy gets cuts half my arm off, I don't want to be going, oh, hang on, mate, oh, that hurts. Your body gets flooded with opioids and a whole lot of chemicals, so you can't feel that area. That makes sense? So part of when we're frozen or in that trauma physiology, that immobility response, is we're designed to not be aware of it. Which is why you'll be like, how's your day? Yeah, I'm having a great day. Best day I've ever had. Fantastic. Having a good day. Go, geez, your shoulders are tight. No, I'm feeling great. I'm having a good day. The tension that we've all got is designed to be unconscious. Otherwise, imagine, none of us would be able to sit here. We'd be like, oh my God, that's killing me, that's hurting, that's contracted. And when we do feel like we're having a good day, go and see one of the osteos or massage people in here. They're going to find 100 points where we've got this unresolved tension that we didn't have when we were like 5, and you could fall asleep on the concrete. Or you could, dare I say, change a bed or a pillow without getting a week of dry neck because you had your flexibility. Okay, so bringing it back to Pilates. How does unresolved trauma, again, think about it as unresolved mobilisation responses, so when the body's wanted to create movement but it's had to contain it, and the deep stabilising muscles have had to lock it in and hold. Ruth Jones, who about 25, maybe even 30 years ago, when I did some muscle balance courses way back in the early days, and she said this great thing: the victims make the most noise, the perpetrators are usually silent. So again, when I was at uni, they'd be going, oh, I've got a problem with the low back pain. I need to work out what's happening there. It's a disc bulge, it's a facet joint, it's whatever. So we'd look at that. Whereas what she's explaining is normally the areas that get the most problems are because up here there's no movement. And so this one now is moving too much. So yes, it's not saying, oh, just do one. It's like, yes, we need to stabilise that, but it doesn't matter how much you stabilise that. If this doesn't start to move, then this is always going to be a problem area. So again, I come back, we go, oh, well, we've got a stiff spine. Why is that? Well, because the muscles are tight, we need to release the muscle. Well, why are the muscles tight? Because for some reason the nervous system is holding tension. If I give you a general anaesthetic, that tension's probably going to fall away. So it's not biomechanical always. And that's where we end up with these whole range of problems where when we lose mobility in our spines or in our hips, we end up with all the dramas everywhere else. Okay? So when we start to realise so much of our problems come from the lack of movement, our limited movement elsewhere, then we have to ask ourselves, how do we get rid of that immobile movement? Now, I mentioned earlier about when we're in a traumatic state, we're designed to ignore areas of pain or an immobilised state. So some of you will have seen this. I just love this picture of the idea of the representation of the body and the brain in terms of how much information is coming from each area. So we've got these huge hands and lips and all sorts of different things. And that up in our brain, when we look at our motor cortex, it's like each part of our body is mapped out here. Or there's even more there. So when you start to think about, okay, so if I've got back pain and I can't do anything about it and I can't get away, and it's actually coming because my psoas is tight and my ilios and QL's tight, because I'm stressed about running out of money, I can't fight it. There's no physical action I can take. It's like it just gets carried around. So what starts to happen? Am I going to spend my whole life miserable because it hurts? No, the body very cleverly basically says we're going to ignore that. The same way if you put a belt on, put on, it's like, oh, it's really tight. Or, so I'm told, a bra, you will feel it for the first little while and then you ignore it, even though at the end of the day you take it off and you've got the big red line. Okay, so your body says, can't do anything about it, not important, let's just lock it down and hold it and forget about it, which is why we end up with these blind areas. So people come into their first Pilates class, they've got their back pain, and you're lying down, you say, okay, now, keep your pelvis stable and let your knee drop out to the side, and they go, yeah, can you feel your pelvis moving? Oh no, I'm keeping it pretty, have a look, and they're like, oh wow, yeah, it's moving a lot, isn't it? But totally disconnected to this area. Or, you know, you're doing Pilates and you're trying to do a movement, it's like, oh, just, you know, move a little bit more, just release here. It's like, I can't even feel that. I don't even know where that is. I've got no idea where that, because when we've got these chronic tension patterns, our brains are designed to disconnect from them and go, can't deal with it, too much pain, let's forget about it. So we end up with a whole lot of areas in our body that we can't feel and we can't find, and they become stiff and unconscious. When you look at dynamic core stability, it's important to recognise that it's unconscious stability through conscious movement. Okay? Now we often use conscious movement and contractions to activate pelvic floor and do different things, but ultimately it needs to be an unconscious process. Now, a little story for me. So I'd done Pilates for a number of years, I'd done heaps of body work and done Bowen, done lots of pelvic floor, lots of physio, and we're taught about core stability. It was always like, you know, pull your guts in, hold your spine really stiff and do all your movements without moving your spine. And after about 3 or 4 months of tremoring, one day I was in a room at a workshop, I was standing there next to someone, and I noticed I felt a bit tense. I just had some sort of, took a breath, and I relaxed, and I felt like my pelvic floor hit the ground. You know, I was like, oh my God, I've been squeezing my bum on for 40 years, and I had no idea. And I'd done pelvic floor contractions for years and years and years, but again, remembering when it's unconscious, it's designed for me to not be aware of it. So if you look at what's happening in the brain, and we start thinking about how do we get reduced dynamic core stability, the tension areas are unconscious. Not only are they unconsciously created, they're designed to never enter my consciousness, because otherwise I'd go, oh my God, I've got the tightest bum, I'm squeezing it on my whole life, I'm going to feel tired and stressed. Okay? We tend to end up with over-recruitment of the mobilisers to help lock down all those things. Piriformis, all those things that are starting to come on. We can also end up with very unconscious collapsed muscle patterns. If you've got all your peripheral mobilisers chronically activated and there's no movement, the deep stabilisers are going to go to sleep and start to relax, and so they start to become under-recruited. Again, it's all unconscious. If we look at what's happening to our consciousness, remembering that whenever we've got a stress or trauma response, this part of the brain is acting basically on its own and this part is decreased, it means that we end up with less body awareness, which is why we're going, oh, I can't feel that. You want me to move where? I can't feel that. What do you mean move there, lift up there? I've no sense of it. Becomes numb and blind. And then of course we end up with decreased conscious movement of these stiff areas. Now someone sent me an email this morning which I found fascinating, because they were talking about a study where they looked at if you change your body posture, it will have an impact on how you feel. So, you know, they were using it for people who were about to do a job interview, and they said if you just stood like that for a minute before the job interview, you would feel better, feel more confident, and you would do much, much better in the interview. Now, part of what happens though is you're going, yes, so if I consciously hold myself up and consciously try and make myself feel bigger and stronger, that's going to work. But guess what's going to happen tomorrow or the next day? Eventually it's like, oh my God, I'm exhausted, which is what a lot of us will do, is we'll spend our lives going, how are you? Yeah, I'm good. I'm feeling pretty strong, actually, I'm feeling pretty big. Why is that? Well, I'm not actually going to say that I'm holding my chest up by pulling down here and I've got this chronic tension in here, because part of what we're doing is we're consciously trying to prop ourselves up, rather than it being a natural free going, yeah, I've just got this sense of lifting and lengthening. So that's where it starts to fit into with Pilates. Now, how do we normally try and change these patterns? Okay, so first of all, we tend to do, and this is much more of the traditional route, this one and the next one, is we tend to try and make conscious changes, such as If my head's like that, what am I going to do? Oh, I just got to do these ones 100 times a day, and that's going to make that one stronger and that one weaker, and the biomechanics will change, and it's all sorted. Now, that has an impact, don't get me wrong, but the question is that dealing with why is my head going like that every time I start to, get stressed about something? So I'm not really dealing with the underlying state of I'm getting into a contracted phase. We often use meditation, active relaxation, the kind of squeeze your muscles and relax. Now, they all have great effects, and my mum used to teach me that when I was little. And we also do a lot of conscious exercise, where for me, Pilates and yoga, all sorts of different things. Now, remembering where in the brain is tension created? It's created down here in the brainstem, unconsciously. So the limit to these processes is that we're trying to use a conscious process to access and get rid of tension, which is designed to be unconscious, that I'm designed never even to feel, yet alone to be able to find it and consciously unwind it. Again, not to say that that's not effective, because we all know the benefits of doing Pilates, doing yoga, doing meditation, all those things. Hugely effective. The other way we often tend to try and change is externally. So we're going, well, I'll get a release or a trigger point, or I'll do acupuncture, I'll do whatever. Again, completely valid and completely helpful and often very effective. Also often very expensive, because you find that every time you get that, I just got to get that massage again, that's how my body knows how to unwind. If I can see Sally or Brian and do that. Again, valid, useful, all of these things. But what we've tended to leave out is there's this other option, was that the body has its own reflex, which is the tremoring, to unconsciously and internally release the tension patterns. David Berceli summed it up so beautifully. He says, do you reckon if the body has a reflex that makes us go like that and contract every time we get stressed, do you reckon it wouldn't have a reflex to unwind that? Which is what the tremoring is. But we've missed it and we've locked it down, so we don't use it. So this is where the tremors fit in, because most of us, we're going, if I'm in Pilates and I'm trying to do a movement and my body starts to shake, I'm going, I've lost control. Whereas when you recognise that the tension's being created outside your conscious control, you're like, thank God I've let go of control, my body knows how to unwind it, because what's creating it and winding it up? My body, my nervous system. The nervous system knows how to unwind its own tension patterns. And when you're tremoring, the greatest analogy, it is literally like an antivirus on your computer, where the tremors will find, your body will find, and the tremors will find those areas of tension that you may not even know and start to unwind them, because the body is, after all, what is creating it. So when we do our exercises, and this is where potentially down the track Pilates fits in, is that we're going to consciously do exercises to fatigue, to deliberately invoke the tremors. But once your body starts to shake, you can control it, as in you can stop it. But you can't create the actual tremor movement, if that makes sense. It's unconscious. So you can, if you're going, when you're tremoring, if you're going, oh, I don't like this, I'll just say, put your legs out straight, good, stop, relax, take control. So it's actually learning how to let go. And our ego is learning how to go, I can let go and let my body move and let it be free, because my body knows how to let go on its own. So we're using our consciousness, but we're stimulating what's known as a subcortical reflex. So our entry point to tension is actually where these patterns are being created and maintained. So what this means is that with this process we'll teach you today, you can still keep doing all the things you're doing, the external, the therapies, the exercises, but by adding this, either between sessions or even during sessions, what's going to happen is you're going to start to unwind parts of your body that you can't consciously unwind yet. And basically the tremors are designed to literally thaw us out. That's all they're doing. They're like going, I've got some unresolved movement and we have to let it go. Now, rather than every time I get stressed, say I'm in school again and the kid wants to hass me and I want to run, instead of when the bell goes, instead of having to go and then run for 20 minutes and go, this is how long I wanted to run for the 20 minutes I was sitting next to him, it's a total waste of energy. So animals and humans and our bodies have devised this very efficient way of releasing all that undischarged adrenaline and tension patterns, which is to tremor. So I don't have to act out every single little response that I've held in. And that's what the tremors are. Very, very simple. Let me just show you now very quickly another video of some people doing, we call them intentional tremors because we're deliberately invoking them and setting them up. So this is just to give you an idea of, these are all people who have done, at a workshop on their first or second day of a workshop. So they've all done exercises to fatigue through the legs. You'll see how his legs, he's not consciously creating that movement, it's just starting to wobble on his own. Here's someone else, you can actually see that this guy's whole pelvis is moving and even coming all the way up to his throat. So again, he's not consciously doing it. I show you this one so you can see that they're not possessed. They're not freaking out, they're not out of control. They're actually all just going, wow, this is really interesting. At any point I can come over and say, how are you going? And if you can't say, oh, this is great, I'm going fine, then I'm going to say, just stop, pop your legs out. So you'll see these guys over here, they've all been tremoring. They put the legs out, take the muscles offload, and the tremoring stops because they're still needing a little bit of load on the muscle. They bring them back up, and again, more of these two, you'll start to see that fairly quickly their body starts to tremor again because it's pre-fatigued. So it's like the body's sort of trying to hold on, but it can't quite hold on. So you've got control about how you stop and start it. So again, you'll see that the movement, again, this is all unconscious, his body moving, coming all the way up to here, but it also changes direction. For a whole lot, I could show you endless videos about where it's moving and why and what it's actually unwinding. So again, here's a woman tremoring all the way up to there. And even though you're moving, you can see in there where there's the stiff areas where the body's like trying to unwind. Again, so you'll see here, her body's totally moving. She can talk to me, she's totally in control, she's not freaking out, she's not possessed. She can stop and start that at any time.
Asymmetrical, isn't it? It looks to be.
Asymmetrical?
Yeah.
It can be. So what will often happen is someone tremors and then they'll be going, they'll go, wow, it's just my right ankle. You go, oh, is that me? They go, oh yeah, that's the one I broke when I was 10. And you go, oh, and then often what will happen is it will tremor and then it'll stop, go to the other side, and then often it'll finish off with both together. That may not be in a one tremor session, that could be in one session, or it could be over 3 months. So it's completely individual, because in a way you're going, the body knows where the tension is. So a lot of people will also experience starting to rock side to side, and you can go, wow, look at that, there's restricted movement. It keeps rocking, and then it's like, oh wow, they're getting a little bit more up their spine. And then there'll be like not consciously, their body will just let go a little, and then they'll have movement through their thoracic spine. So you can see the body starts to actually find these tension patterns and then start to unwind them on itself.
Do you ever get emotional release with that tremoring?
Good question. So you can get it. The thing is, if your body needs for some reason that a particular thing that's locked down, if your brain needs to experience the emotional release, then it will. More often than not, you won't. So, you know, even if I have a room full of 100 people who've been through the bushfires, maybe 5 of them will be having an emotional experience. The other 95 will be going, this is fascinating. And they'll be going, wow, I don't have that tension that I normally get when I am anxious. That's gone, but I didn't feel anxious to have to let go of it. When you come back to the brain and looking at what's happening with the brain, then you recognise that if we're working with the movement rather than thinking about emotions, then you start to get a picture of why we don't necessarily have to have an emotional release. Because if you're going, wow, here's where the tension's created, deeper than the emotions, if we can release here, we may not even need to feel any of that stuff in there. Because to the body doesn't really care what it feels, and it doesn't really care what happened. So it doesn't go, oh, I've got to talk to you about the guy's breath smelt and this happened and then the money was... The body just says, all I know how to do is go, whatever the stress is, whether it's psychological or physical, all it knows how to do is go, contract, and relax. So you don't necessarily have to go, this is an emotional process. And this is where traditionally, because we've viewed it all psychologically and psycho-emotionally, it's like going, oh, if we just talk about it, it's not really doing the thing. We have to get down there, we have to feel and express the emotions. But what commonly happens is I have people come to workshops who've gone, I've done 30 years of work on myself. I've done all the stuff, I've done all the release, I've done it. And then they tremor and they go, oh my God, I never realised that this was all still in my body, because the muscle patterns are still there. So when people tremor, the body will organise it. If you need to have emotional release or a psychological, like a memory, then it will come up. But if it doesn't matter, because we're just wanting to create greater freedom of movement. In terms of emotions, while you're asking that, so when you're all tremoring, I'll come around and say, how are you doing? Now, if you're lying on the floor and you're bawling your eyes out, I'll say, how you doing? And you go, if you're going, this is great, I haven't cried about my dog died, I'll be going, fantastic, because I'm not looking at you psychologically, I'm looking at you neurophysiologically. I'm going, wow, look at this diaphragm releasing. Some people might be laughing hysterically for no reason. I'll be going, wow, the diaphragm's releasing. We tend to look at it and go, oh my God, there's an emotion, what's happening there? Rather than go, what's happening physically here? But if I come around and you're tremoring and you're lying there and you've got this tiny little tremor and you're like, how you going? You go, yeah, I'm fine, then I'll be like, right, you need to stop because you're obviously overwhelmed by what you're experiencing. So what I'm saying there is, it doesn't matter whether you have emotions or you don't. All that matters in this process is, are you okay with what you're experiencing? So you could be screaming the house down, having a great time. I'll be like, great, get into it, because I cannot give you a better exercise to free up your diaphragm and your breathing than crying or laughing. So I say, if you've got a chance to cry, get into it. I can't do any breathing better. But if you're not comfortable, I'm going to be saying, great, stop the process, have a little rest. So it's irrelevant how big or small the emotions are. This whole process is about you learning to self-regulate using the tremors, so you can go home for the rest of your life and never get overwhelmed. Most people won't. Okay. Now, because we're going to do some exercises, so if you've got any issues with blood pressure or heart conditions, old injuries and operations and then let me know if you're really concerned about it, but primarily it's your job to regulate how hard you're doing the exercises, and I'll explain that as we go. If you're pregnant, I can't, as a physio, recommend that you do the process. I say that very specifically that way because there's not enough evidence about it that we can't recommend it. If you're epileptic or you've got Parkinson's, these are a different experience, a different type of tremor, but people are often very worried about it because they're worried that they're going to have an epileptic fit because you're going, oh, my body's out of control. Same thing if you've got any major mental health conditions, and we're just saying if they're medicated as a measure of their intensity. It's not to say that you shouldn't tremor or you couldn't tremor, because if you go out and have a car accident, you're probably going to tremor no matter what's wrong with you. Okay, so it's not to say it's contraindicated, but we just need to be cautious that you're not sort of unwinding more than you can deal with at the time. So when you're doing the exercises to lead in or you're tremoring, there should not be any physical pain or discomfort. Okay, if it's creating pain or discomfort, you're just going to stop the process and have a little rest and wait. If you're starting to feel emotionally overwhelmed or nervous, again, I'll just say stop, have a little break, just stop for a sec, it's okay, stop. Just relax, get up, have a drink of water. If you're ready, start tremoring again. Remembering, most of you won't have that. If you're having major, significant nausea or huge temperature changes in your body, again, this can be totally fine and normal. The question will be, are you okay with it? And if you are, I'll be like, great, this is fantastic. Nervous system is working great. The main one here, if you feel like you want to get away and you don't want to do it, or especially if you feel foggy, distant, drowsy or tired, and I'm not going to explain it all, but basically if you feel tired, stop and have a little rest. Okay? Don't keep pushing through it. I'll explain that in all other workshops. After 2 or 3 minutes, if you're still tired, I'll be saying, you're tired, your body's had enough, stop. If after 2 or 3 minutes you're like, hey, I'm not tired anymore, I'll go, that's interesting, your nervous system has just created tiredness, and now it's uncreated tiredness, would you like to continue? Okay, so if you feel foggy, distant or drowsy, you're going to stop. Most of you won't experience any of these. If you do, simply stop, rest. Start again when you feel ready. And as we're doing the tremoring, I'll show you, just pop your legs out to stop the tremors and take the muscle offload. So the key thing here is, my job today is to teach you tremors are normal, this is how they work, this is just a tiny percentage, this is how they benefit. So they're worth using. Now I'm going to show you how to turn the tremors on or allow them to be activated so you can then take them away and use them for the rest of your life, every night even, just lying in bed. And then the next part of the job is teaching you how to regulate them. So it's like, if I give you the keys to the car and you've never driven before, I'm not going to say, here's the Porsche, go and do 300 kilometres on the highway. We're going to say, just take it nice and easy, and as your skills develop and as your relationship with your body and your tremoring develops, then you can sort of follow your own body down the track. The exercises aren't the key part of the process, because we could sit here and say, okay, I want you to remember your worst trauma and I want you to go back and try and think about it and remember it, and you'd probably all start to shake and tremor. Or we go, great, let's just get you naked and we're all going to take you out and stand you on the road. You'd be like, oh, hang on, I don't know if I want to do that. So there's many ways to activate the tremors. The beauty of this model is you don't have to talk about your trauma, you don't have to talk about anything, we're just looking at physically in terms of let's fatigue the muscles, because the body is just waiting for a chance to let go. Okay? And I'll give you the story about all the, the tension we all carry around, and it sounds very depressing, but I want you to think about this. When you've been holding onto your bladder for like the last hour of this talk, and how, and then you get to the toilet and how good that feels? This is what it feels like in your body when these parts of your body that have been tense for years that we haven't even known about start to release. There's like, oh wow, that's what relax feels like. Oh, that's what breathing's supposed to feel like. Nearly all traditional cultures in the world use these tremors. Peter Levine, who started somatic experiencing, he first came across them when he was working with African gamekeepers. And they basically said, when we catch and release an animal, if it doesn't tremor when we let it go, it's going to die. So in traditional cultures, they're not going, oh, hang on, has there been a random controlled double-blind study on this yet, whether we should use it? They're just going, animal tremors, it's okay. Animal doesn't tremor, it dies. There's something going on here, we need to use this. So they use them in birth. They use them for people who are psychotic and all sorts of different things. You know, Maori dance has it. There's an old process called Seiki Jutsu from Japan, which is called, it's like where the body will start to move and on its own. So it's just that in our culture we're going, well, hang on, we need 5,000 studies before we can say this is okay. If our body's been held on for a long time and it's wanting to let go, then it's kind of like, why can't it just go, oh, we're better? My sense is almost there's that little battle between let go, oh, no, you know, and there's like the contract, relax. That's one model. The other model is going, there's charge in the nervous system that's literally, you know, they're going, it's like my engine's running at 100 miles an hour internally, but I've got the handbrake on. So it's like when you let the handbrake on, it's going, whoa! And the body's going, how do we get rid of it? Because in a way, the memory of the body's memory is going, when that guy was coming in and I was sitting here all compliant because he had the gun, what I really wanted to do was run like buggery. And so the body's going, this is what I wanted to do. I couldn't do, but instead of going, I'm going to run for 500 miles, it basically says, how do we get rid of that memory pattern? And Robert Scaia talks about, I showed you earlier, he talks about it as an extinction of a sensory motor experience. So he's going, if the image of that guy and all those things, every time I think of them, if that activates my body unconsciously, I get stressed. But when you've tremored and you've totally, fully let it go, then I can go, hey, here's that guy. And you're not going to have a reaction because the whole memory experience, so I haven't gone into memory, but there's a whole thing of, well, how does the body remember and all that. But the memory of it then is resolved. So what it means is when the little black dog comes over, instead of going, oh, black dog, I can actually go, wow, black dog, friendly tail, that looks fine, let's go and pat it. Rather than because the memory of the traumatic bite has been released from the body.